This is demo number 2 for the Icon Sets project, project number 3 in Intro to Art. So the last demo, I ended with kind of finalizing the sketches for my icon sets. And then the next step is to really figure out the colors that I want to use to test out some color schemes. So I find this easiest to do digitally. So I'm going to show you kind of what my digital color tests look like. You can do this with colored pencils, you can do this with markers, cut paper. I mean, you can even just do like boxes next to each other. But I'll show you how I do the digital stuff at the end of this demo, but for now I want to talk about the color. So you can see I traced the lines digitally and then started putting color in those lines. The first color scheme I tested out, I wanted it to feel childlike and playful, but I wanted to push a little bit away from classic primary kids' colors like red, yellow, um, blue. And so I used pink, lime green, and like a sort of turquoise, teal, lighter blue color. And so I had that 3 color scheme, so I applied it slightly differently to each one. So there are various ones where the different colors stand out more than others, but it works pretty well with the simple shapes. And then I thought I'd try a different color scheme. So in this one, I went back to, again, I always go back to that rainbow color scheme, but in this case, because I am working with a set that involves kids' toys, I thought I'd try the rainbow color scheme, but instead of doing the rainbows on each one, I'd make each one a different color of the rainbow, and then I'd play with the lights and the darks of the color. So the beach ball is totally red, but with some light parts and some dark parts. The teddy bear is orange, the drum is yellow, the train is green, and the puzzle is blue. As I was doing this, I realized that for this project, I don't actually want to see lines in your icon sets. I only want to see shapes. And so I was doing the color schemes, but I was looking at it with lines. So when I take the lines away, this is what that first color scheme looks like. I still like this color scheme pretty well. The one thing I realized is that I was relying on lines for the eyes and the nose of the teddy bear. So I'm going to have to go back in and make those as shapes, and colors, which is totally doable. So I can put the green in there, or I may flip the colors around if that doesn't work well. And then this is what my second color scheme looks like. For some of these, this works pretty well, like the teddy bear. For the yellow drum, it's a little bit harder. It still works, but ultimately, I think I like this first color scheme. It's more cohesive because they're all using the same colors, and it does just feel a little bit different from what normal toy color schemes are like. It feels like a toy color scheme, but just slightly different. As I was thinking through, these are all different shapes. So I want to put a background on them. Like many icons, they have that defined background. So then I started playing with different colored backgrounds. So I put a circle, and then I did a dark gray, I did a light gray, I did a yellow. This one on the bottom left here is actually a white circle, but you can't tell because it's on a white background. Which is something to think about, that icons are often on a white or a black background. And so if you have whites or blacks, sometimes those can just fade into the background. And then I thought, well, let's try a different shape. So I tried a rounded rectangle, and I went back to that yellow because I really like the feel of that yellow. Like it feels bright and cheerful, and it fits in the attitude that I'm trying to go for. But it feels like the value of all the colors are about the same. So the drum doesn't stand out against the background as much as I like that yellow. So I tried toning the yellow down a bit in that second one. ultimately, I think I'm going to go with that dark gray circle in the first one. It's not my ideal pick in terms of attitude, but, and here's where the icon stuff comes into play, it's much more ideal in terms of contrast and being able to see. It shows up so nicely against the white background, and it would show up nicely against a dark background as well too. And it's always going to be that perfect. I like the circle a little bit better than the rounded rectangle, so I'm going to be able to put everything in that circle. So now moving forward, I have my color scheme, the blue, pink, and green, against a circle of gray. So now I need to test out the different, well, you it's good if you like try out the different media, but ultimately pick the one that you want. I'll show you the 3 different media options. Okay, I am going to do the marker demo first. So the reality is, I just thought I recorded myself doing this whole demo and did the whole demo, and didn't realize that my phone kicked me off because someone texted me. So I'm just going to walk you through what I did instead of redoing this whole thing all over again. If you have questions, always, please ask. So for my marker demo, I have markers. I pulled out the markers that I wanted to use. I had my drawing. So the icons need to be 5 inches by 5 inches. So I printed out the computer thing that I had done already, because I knew it was the exact same dimensions. My drawing that I did in my sketchbook wasn't the right dimensions. So you can either redraw on your final piece of paper, but you just want to be careful you don't have a lot of erase marks because you want it to be clean. And so that's where I was able to trace it. And then the paper that you're going to put your markers on. So I used marker paper, which is nice because you can see it's see-through, so that allowed me to trace with my pencil really easily. But I could have also just drawn over it with markers, but you start to lose vision as you go over it. Marker paper also accepts the marker really nicely. But any kind of paper will do. Your watercolor paper, printer paper. What I would recommend is getting your markers out and testing out a bunch of different papers and seeing what you like best. What's going to give you the texture you like best. Try to get that as close to being smooth as possible. And then if you have thicker paper and you want to trace, one trick is to tape the papers together and then tape it to a window during the daylight hours, and the light shining through will help you trace. If you have a light table, great. That's an awesome option too. But taping it to a window is an easy way to figure out how to trace things. So with the markers, you can see I tested out a couple markers for each color. And ultimately for the background, my marker set doesn't have a gray color, which many marker sets don't. Sadly, I think that's gray is a lovely color to have in a marker. So what I ended up doing is I ended up layering a brown and a purple over each other. I tested out a brown and a blue, but I liked the darker nature of the brown and the purple. And it created, it's still a little bit brownish, but it created kind of a nice grayer color. And then I took my paper and I moved that sketch and put it on a white piece of paper so I could just see what I was doing easier. So I had a pencil sketch of everything I was going to draw. And then I worked lightest to darkest because markers will sort of pick up what you have already drawn. So a lighter marker will pick up a darker marker and kind of bring that color in, and you don't want that to happen. So I did everything pink first, then blue, then green. Green and blue are kind of like equivalent. I could have done one or the other. And then I did the background because the background was the darkest. And so what happens is when it overlaps just a tiny bit, all you get is like a slightly dark edge instead of like pulling the color into it. I didn't want green in my pink. When you do markers, you want to go slowly so that the ink kind of spreads evenly. It doesn't do that dry out thing as you're moving quickly. and you want to work in consistent directions. So you want to trace the edge first, just like you did when you were a kid coloring with crayons. And then you want to do consistent marks. So I'll show you right here. So with the pink. So if I was drawing that triangle, I would do the edge first and then consistent strokes that barely overlap each other, making sure I'm getting all the white. And you want to do at least 2 layers. So what I recommended and what I did in my piece is I did another outline after that one was done. All the way to the edge. And then I flipped it and I did strokes in the opposite direction. And this just helps smooth it out so it doesn't feel, it gets a little bit checkerboardy. And again, go slow. But it helps to smooth out that classic marker texture and give you a much more smooth surface. So go slow, do even strokes, try to do at least 2 layers going in different directions. And make sure there's no white spots at the end. And again, we're not doing lines, we're just doing shapes and contrast. So there's no, you can see a little bit of my marker lines, but that's the goal. Okay, hopefully this demo works or records better than my marker demo. For cut paper, what do you need? You need scissors. You need paper to cut with, or to cut. If you've got intricate cutting, I recommend an X-Acto knife and a cutting board. And then you'll need glue. So I'm using Mod Podge, which is essentially like a kind of watered down version of white glue. So you can use white glue. It's just a little, this is a little easier because you're going to want to paint it. So you need a paintbrush that you can kind of ruin. It's possible to get this out if you're careful. But ideally you're using a paintbrush that's not your nicest paintbrush. And then you'll need water. Anytime you paint, you need water and paper towel. And then I put newspaper down because what we're going to do is after we cut, we're going to flip things over. We're going to paint all the way to the edge on the newspaper and then put it back on our background. So with markers, you kind of drew it out and then just filled in all the shapes. With cut paper, you want to think a little differently. You want to think big to little. So I don't need to cut out a circle background and then cut out the shape of the drum. The circle can just go on the bottom. And like the pink part of this drum, I don't need to cut out separate pink triangles. I can cut out a kind of big pink drum and then put the blue triangles, because I only have 2 of them, and the green strips over the top of that. So think building up in simplicity. It'll actually keep it clean because again, we want to avoid gaps. We want to avoid white space. White space and the like weird gappy nature between shapes. And we're not doing, remember, we're not doing lines, so it's just all shape based, but that's really easy to do with cutting paper. Now I've got this printout and I'm actually going to use it. It's going to help me. So what I could do, again, I could trace and then cut, or I could put this, like carefully put this over the top, and I can just cut this piece of paper as I go, because this piece of paper is not precious to me, but it is the right size. So I'm going to grab a little bit of blue tape. So I'm going to kind of carefully, lightly tape it down. So that'll help keep it in place. What I want to be careful if I'm not drawing first is that it's not shifting as I cut. So I'm just going to use scissors right now and see how that goes. And cut carefully. Again, cut closer to the hinge in scissors, because you'll generally get a smoother, sharper cut. And if you're not feeling comfy with scissors, use that X-Acto knife. If you're not comfy with the X-Acto knife, use the scissors. If for any reason you will need to cut out the inside of your shape, you will need an X-Acto knife. That away. All right, got a pretty decent circle. So again, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do this part as pink. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to cut, and I'm going to cut a little bit over where it goes into the green. So this one, I didn't cut quite big enough, so I have the shape, I could recut it and cut a little bit more on the edge, but I'm gonna put it a little bit towards the middle, assuming that my green lines will cover the edges of that drum. So I just, again, need to remember to make my green lines a little bit thicker than I've left them there. And then if worse comes worse, I can always recut that blue shape because I've got lots of extra paper. So now I've got these 4 things. So it's easy, the smaller your paper and the less you're dealing with. So I'm gonna cut these up, the larger paper, so I'm not having to worry about the other parts. So this is the bottom. And it's good to know where you can cut extra and where you can't. So, oops, this, how did that go? Oh, this all got flipped around. Okay. That's tricky. Nope, that was right. Uh-oh, don't do what I just did. Just get all confused. There, got it. Do be careful. Okay, there's my bottom, which can go over. There's my top, which I think actually goes this way. That looks better. I'm not making it perfect right now because ultimately that's going to happen when I glue it. Okay, but I want that green part over the top. Okay, and now I'm going to do the drumsticks. And I'm going to put this to the side so hopefully I don't mess it up again. you do use your original sketch, I'm discovering it might be a good idea to make sure you photograph it so you can consult it in case you need to rearrange things, just like I was struggling to. Okay, so now I'm gonna clean this up and get the glue ready. Okay, so when gluing, you need to work from bottom to top. So the first thing I need to glue is the pink thing, the pink shape. So I want to make sure that's in the right spot. And then I'm going to move everything else out kind of in order so that I know how it goes. And what I'm going to do, if you want to make light pencil marks where things go, if that's helpful, you can do that. Just make sure that they get erased or are not visible. So you might want to make them like inside where this actually needs to go. I'm going to do my best to eyeball it and we'll see how it goes. But what I want to do is I want to turn this piece over on a piece of newspaper or kind of paper that doesn't matter. And then I'm going to lightly and evenly coat the back of this with glue all the way to the edges. I don't want to get glue on the top. I'm going to turn it back over, arrange it where I think it needs to go, and then very carefully, if you have glue, you want to be careful about getting glue on your hands because again, that'll kind of go over the top. So you want to try to keep this as clean as possible. So one of the things to realize is like I just put glue on the newspaper here. So I'm gonna grab some new newspaper so that when I turn my new shapes over, they aren't gonna get glue on them. So I'm gonna turn this shape over. Now this one I didn't get enough glue right here, so I might need to take my brush and just dab a little bit of glue. But ideally, so yeah, what happened is I got a little bit too much, so it squished out there. Some of that will be covered with green, but some of that will just be permanently stained. By doing it this way, you're kind of avoiding that classic bumpy Elmer's glue stained look. Because you're making the glue as even as possible. Okay, I should have placed that one, positioned it a little bit more because it got stuck and it's kind of shoved over to the side a little bit. And I'm also noticing that I didn't do a spectacular job of centering my drum. It's a little bit too far down. So I probably should have made pencil marks. Okay, So there is my cut paper drum. I'm getting a little bit of a wrinkle there. It's a little bit inevitable, but for the most part, it's smooth. I don't have any gaps where there should be shape. It's all in the right place. It looks pretty good. There's not a ton of, there's a little bit of glue sneaking out right there, but ultimately it should dry pretty clear. Now I got lucky. I had paper that was the color scheme that I wanted to use. So I had paper that was the right color. If you don't have paper that's the right color, one option is to change your color scheme to the paper that you have. But again, I am looking for an intentional color scheme. So the other option would be to paint paper, just kind of paint your paper smoothly, either with watercolor or acrylic paint, and then cut it out after the paint dries. Okay, so this last demo is a digital demo. I'm using Photoshop, and the first thing I do is make my canvas 5 by 5 inches. And I put my sketch on there, and then I'm adding a new layer. I'm choosing my brush, and on that new layer, I am just gonna trace that line. So the size of my brush or the shape of my brush doesn't really matter, because ultimately I'm going to hide these lines, but they're going to help me figure out how to fill in my shapes. So if you're doing a drawing, if you're using a drawing program on a tablet, like an iPad or a Surface, use one that has the ability to make multiple layers. So I've got my sketch on one layer, and then I've got this line drawing on another layer. And then after I finish that line drawing, I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna make another layer. There it is. And I'm gonna put it under my line drawing. Since my line drawing is transparent, this means that when I paint under it, I'm not gonna cover it up. If I were to paint over my sketch, I would end up covering it up, and it'd be hard to see where those edges are. But that's why I do this separate transparent drawing over the top. So I've made my brush big, I've chosen my color, and I am just filling in my shapes. I'm not too worried about making the edges perfect, because that is easily fixable with digital drawing. And for this one, I'm doing all the color on the same layer. So I'm doing my next aqua color. Then picking the green color. And then I'm gonna work on cleaning it up with the lines still there. So I like to use that eyedropper tool to make sure that I'm getting the exact same color. So you wanna make sure you're not switching colors slightly, getting a slightly different pink. And then I made my brush size smaller, because that'll allow me to get those details. So I'm just starting by like cleaning up the pink areas, any of that green or blue that's gone into the pink, cleaning that up. And then I'll go and do the same for the blue. And then the same for the green. And then what I'm going to do after that is I'm going to choose the eraser, and I'm going to go around the edges and just kind of erase those edges, clean those up a little bit. So after that's done, I'm going to hide the black line sketch layer because again, we don't want outlines in this project. So they were really helpful as that top layer to kind of paint under. But now I don't want them. So I could delete it essentially, but I prefer hiding things because sometimes it's nice to go back and use that resource if it's still there. So now what I'm doing is I'm just visually, those lines are kind of jagged because I couldn't see them under the black lines, so I'm cleaning them up. So I'm trying to do kind of bold strokes because I get cleaner lines with that. So again, I'm starting with the pink, go into, and then I'm going to go back over with the green and adjust things a little bit with the eraser. But I'm trying to get those lines as smooth as possible. So again, you may be hearing my son upstairs in some of these demos banging on a drum or banging on the piano. Sorry, that's his lovely noise. He likes to make music. This is why I'm doing an image of a drum. So I'm erasing, and then I erase a little too much. That's okay, because I can go back in with the paintbrush, just toggle back and forth between the paintbrush and the eraser until I get the image that I really want to get. And get those lines clean. In this, because I am sort of going for a more polished look, or a less polished look, I'm going for kind of a kiddo look, so I'm okay if the lines aren't, if they're a little bit wonky. If you're using a shape-based program like Illustrator, it's even easier to get perfect lines. So what I've done is I've added a layer underneath that because I need that gray circle. So in a layer underneath the painted drum, I used the selection tool, but then unfortunately I selected it over the edge, and so it didn't get that perfect circle. So I'm adjusting it, and then I'm going to realize, I need to redo it. So I'm going to make a smaller circle, fill it with gray, and then I'm going to adjust the size so that it goes completely over the edge. So now I've got that dark gray. I'm going to keep adjusting things so that the drum fits in to the circle nicely, and it fits and it kind of fills that 5x5 square that I've created. And then when I've got things adjusted, I'll call it good. So take your pick of which of the media you want to attempt. Again, it can kind of depend on like what you have access to, the right colors, the technology, and yeah, things like that. But give it a shot, and I look forward to seeing how your icons turn out.